Larry King, the hell with you. This is TWI, Troy Wilde Interviews. Charlie Rose, what are you, like 83? The hell with you. This is TWI, Troy Wilde Interviews. Piers Morgan, you, sir, are a moron. This is TWI, Troy Wilde Interviews.
All right, and here we go with episode 19 of Troy Wilde Interviews. I am he from Phoenix, Arizona, the greatest state in the union, in my opinion. Certainly one of the hottest. Holy shit. We hit 107 yesterday. Of course, the broadcast quality podcast dedicated to interviewing comics in the U.S. and all over the world. Today, episode 19, Jon Levine from Atlanta, which by all accounts has an emerging and very hot comedy scene. And hot it is getting in Arizona. This is the time of year where we go here in Phoenix from temperatures in the mid-90s daytime high, upper 80s, mid-90s. Man, it shifts within a week, usually a little earlier than this, and we'll be at 105 every day. And then by the middle of June, middle of July, we're at 115 every day with double-digit humidity. So we are quickly approaching gun-in-mouth weather. And somehow I managed to have a cold, a severe crud cough cold, and I blame it on my 5-year-old son and his associates at his school. We went the other day to this school where he'll be starting kindergarten here in a little while. And of course, there are, like 2 million of these little kids are all like 3 feet tall and they play with blocks or whatever. And let's face it, cleanliness is not exactly their thing. That was Tuesday. By Wednesday, I'm not feeling good. By Thursday, I'm like, oh, man, I feel like shit. And this I'm recording on Saturday, still feel like crap. But that's what being around little kids will do to you. I've had more colds and influenza in the last 5 years easily than I've had in my whole life. But, man, I love that little kid. He's the best little kid ever. This Jon Levine guy. Interesting guy. And Jon Levine, as I'm interviewing him, a profile emerges, and I profiled Jon Levine. I profiled him. He started to remind me very much of another comic we interviewed, episode 9, 10 episodes ago, Adam Heath Avitable, also from Florida. Adam grew up in the East Coast, New York or New Jersey or something like that. Then family moves to Florida, and he's in Orlando, comedy guy, very happy, great relationships with his family. This guy, Jon Levine, just moved to Atlanta from Florida, and he had been raised part of his childhood in New Jersey. And both of these guys are just happy. They're just looking forward to getting on stage, and they can't wait. And they just sound so balanced with everything and so full of love. And they both right away talk about the great relationships they have with their families. And I say to Jon, you are the 1 in 4 comics who likes himself, who does not want to shoot himself in the face on an ongoing basis. 3 out of 4 are like me, rejected by our mothers or fathers or women in our lives, seeking attention from women to replace the love that, in my case, my mother pulled away, and extremely terrified that the woman's going to leave me like my mother did and abandon me with her love. So that's what makes us seek out attention and approval from audiences and from women and probably from people in general. That's not the case with Jon Levine, and he basically says, I'm almost at a handicap because I can't go to those dark places that some of these other guys can. And I said, there is just a spectrum of personalities in comedy. You have Jon Levine and Adam Heath Avitable on one side, where they have, very, God bless them, very healthy, happy relationships with their parents. And in Jon Levine's case, his parents encouraged him to pursue the arts. And on the other side, you have Richard Pryor, whose mother was a hooker. That's sort of the spectrum. You have a lot of damaged and broken people in comedy, but then you have the occasional Jon Levine, Adam Heath Levitable, who like themselves. My self-esteem is low self-esteem is at an all-time high, but I still lack self-esteem at a really, really scary level. If you hear something in the background, I have guys trimming trees in the background outside, and they're also picking up oranges. I don't know what they're doing back there. I think they took my son's toy. You son of a bitch, put that back. He put it back. Okay, so we're back to Jon Levine. So that's what we discussed during the interview, that these guys who have good relationships with their families, basically, they come to comedy as another form of art. So, I want to try comedy because I've tried voice work or broadcasting or something else. Whereas the Richard Pryor profile, they come to it because they're so fucked up and they can't afford therapy. They need to tell somebody, my mama was a hooker, and they need to kind of go off. And it's a form of therapy. Jon Levine, very good dude. Check him out at JONLEVINE.com, JonLevine.com. And before we get to John, I want to throw out a big shout out to Mark Maron from What the Fuck, WTF Pod. To me, I listened to this guy, and I just listened to an interview he did with Kevin Nealon. And Kevin Nealon has a new series coming up, or has a series already that's on CBS. I don't know what it is. I haven't had broadcast television in 10 years, but what a pleasure to listen to Kevin Nealon. And he just goes so deep. Kevin Nealon got Saturday Night Live because he was best friends with Dana Carvey. Dana Carvey got cast, and they were looking for kind of a backup news talent, tall, lanky, like Chevy Chase had done. So Dana says, hey, I got a friend, Kevin. That's how it happened. I didn't really know that story. And he was on SNL for like 8 or 9 years. Then he was on Weeds for 8 or 9 years. So I listened to these interviews with Maron, and the guy is just so authentic and such a pleasure that he is to listen to. And he's a pioneer. He really has laid the groundwork for what I'm doing, what a lot of us are doing with podcasts. And Mark struggled to make it in comedy for 20 years or more, and then worked in broadcasting. And when that didn't work out, it was about 2008 or 9 or something like that. It was sort of the beginning of podcasting, and he just started doing it, and he is just a hugely successful guy and a true pioneer in podcasting. And I am having the time of my life doing this. And if you really think about it, man, it's full circle. 100 years ago, you're listening to audio before television, before talking pictures. You're listening to audio from a radio somewhere in the house. And now you're listening to audio, maybe right now on your smartphone, tablet, PC, laptop. I don't really see any laptops anymore. It's full circle, though. It's delivering audio. It's the same thing. We're delivering audio. The means has improved tremendously, but it's kind of the same thing. It's full circle. So thank you, Mark Maron. I am a huge fan. I continue to listen, especially when he interviews the comics. He gets the occasional musician, like some guy on there from Devo. I can give a fuck about Devo 40 years ago. Why would I care now? Like, hey, the guy from Devo's here. I'm like, Devo, please. Let's get to it. Episode 19, Troy Wilde Interviews, the Broadcast Quality Podcast. And we say hello to our good friend, Jon Levine.
Hello?
Oh, hi, John.
Yes.
Troy calling. How are you?
Troy, how are you doing?
I am doing well. We are recording. Is that okay?
That's fine. How's the audio sound on your?
Oh, you sound great. You mentioned that you have a broadcast microphone. Is that right?
Correct. I do some podcasting myself, so.
And what type of podcasting are you doing?
Well, right now I'm on a little bit of a hiatus. For about the last year and a half, I did a comedy podcast with another comedian in South Florida called Coming Up Short. We ran that for about, I think we finished up with about 80 to 85 episodes before I moved on from Fort Lauderdale to Atlanta.
85 episodes. Was it a good experience overall?
Oh, it was great. It was great. We loved it. In fact, it was a weekly podcast, about 30 minutes, and we interviewed guests every week, actually similar to what you're doing. And we've actually had a lot of people come back and say, "Oh, you guys got to start it up again." But it's just a little hard with us being so separated, distance-wise.
And so you were in Florida. Now you're in Atlanta.
Correct.
Why did you move from Florida to Atlanta?
Well, in addition to stand-up comedy, I also do some acting work, so commercials, TV film stuff, and recently over the last couple of years, Florida has decided to let the tax breaks that they were incentivizing studios and production companies to bring them into the state. They've decided to let those tax breaks expire, and those expired at the end of 2015, I believe, and Atlanta decided to pick up the mantle and put a lot of tax breaks in place and invite a lot of studios and incentivize a lot of studios and production companies to come shoot a lot of stuff here. So there was just so much more work in Atlanta than there was really anywhere else in the southeastern United States.
And when you live in Atlanta and you live in Florida, is it the difference maybe between, Phoenix and West Texas, which isn't huge? I mean, is it a different sort of experience living in Atlanta?
Absolutely. I'm not too familiar with West Texas, so I couldn't tell you the difference between that and Phoenix. But
yeah, just West Texas, you don't want to be familiar with West Texas, man. They could carpet bomb that place and drop a nuke, and it would probably do some improvements.
Don't tell the people of West Texas you said that.
Right.
They might be a little upset if they've even heard of podcasting down there. I don't know. It doesn't sound like they have. No, it is. Atlanta is more of a metropolitan city. Fort Lauderdale, South Florida is very much a beach town. It's a tourist destination, which is great. I mean, it's fine for what it is, and there's certainly worse places to live. But Atlanta is it's just more metro. It's more urban. It's got more more cosmopolitan. It's got a livelier nightlife scene. It's got more energy. It's got more young people. It's got more opportunity. I love Atlanta so much more than I did South Florida, and plus the weather is so much better.
And Jon Levine, your website is Jon Levine, JonLevine.com. And I was reading on there, you're in your mid-40s?
Yes, 43.
And you grew up you were born and raised to some extent in New Jersey and then to Florida? Correct.
I moved to Jersey with my family when I was about 7 years old. So I really, at this point in my life, say that I spent the majority of my upbringing in Fort Lauderdale.
And at what point did you break into comedy? Tell us how that happened.
Sure. So sort of a little bit of a long road, but when I was a kid, I actually used to do acting. My parents got me involved in doing TV commercials and films when I was a younger child, and that ended when we moved from the Northeast to Florida. But I've always sort of been interested in that, in the performance realm. And my family is very funny. We're all my parents are very funny. My brother and my sister are very funny. So I've always had sort of that side to me. And I was voted funniest of my high school class, things like that. And people are always like, you should be a stand-up comedian. That's what that would be a great fit for you. And my answer to that was always, I'm funny around people. I'm situationally funny. I can make comments of what's going on, but I don't have the ability to sit down and write a joke. Or at least I didn't think I had that ability. And I sort of channeled that energy and that kind of stuff. I got into TV news. I was a sportscaster for a little while, things like that. And then about 3.5 years ago, I was having lunch with a friend of mine, and we were just talking about general stuff, and he offhandedly made the comment that his neighbor was taking a stand-up comedy class at the Improv in Fort Lauderdale, to which I replied, I didn't even realize that there were stand-up comedy classes. And he said, he was doing it to get better at public speaking. So I kind of filed that away in the back of my head. And after lunch, I went home and I Googled the class and signed up for it that day. And I didn't tell anybody about it. It was a 5-week class, which culminated it with a show in front of your friends and family at the Improv. And I started taking it, and I loved it. And I did that show, and that was my first 5 minutes. Was on that stage, and immediately following that, 2 days later, I was at a local open mic, and that's the way it's been ever since.
Was it a nerve-wracking experience? Does it continue to be a nerve-wracking experience, or do you enjoy it?
It's not nerve-wracking. Interestingly enough, because of my experience as a child, and because I got into public speaking when I was in grade school. I ended up getting into student politics, and I was giving speeches in front of the school as a student council president, things like that. And then I was in drama when I was in high school. The actual stage part of it was very natural to me. That it didn't even sort of seep into my mind that would be nerve-wracking because I was just very comfortable speaking in front of groups of people. So that part of it was never a nerve-wracking part. It still isn't. I mean, I'm very comfortable just being, I don't even give it a second thought, to be honest. I'm actually more nervous at a small little open mic that maybe has 4 or 5 people in front of it when I'm doing new jokes, just because I don't know how they're going to go over. That to me puts a little bit more nerves in me than really anything else.
When I do an open mic or I do comedy, just about every time I want to shoot myself in the face. I am just so nervous. And I think, Jon, just the difference between you and I read your website, and now that I'm talking to you, it sounds like you have great, really strong bonds with your family. You had a good family experience. My mother abandoned me, not physically, but with her love. So I think you have like a lot of self-esteem coming from those relationships. So you can sit there and wait for the open mic. You're okay, because on some level, and probably not consciously, your mother loves you, whereas me, I can't really have low self-esteem because I didn't have any to begin with.
All right. Do you want to lay down on the couch? Maybe we can talk about this a little bit further.
I'm just riffing, but yeah, no, I get that. But what you're saying here is that stand-up doesn't make you nervous because of your public speaking experience, but in those other venues, you're not expected to crack jokes and be funny one after the next. So stand-up can be certainly a far more challenging and different experience than those other events.
Oh, there's no doubt, and I don't want you to take my comments as me saying that stand-up is easy. It's not, by any stretch of the imagination. It's the challenge that makes it great. I think if it was something that was sort of just a wave of the hand, I wouldn't enjoy it as much as I do, and I'm sure a lot of other comedians wouldn't either. It's that payoff. I mean, that's what it is. It's the roll of the dice, and when it hits, and you win, I mean, there's no other feeling like it. But on the flip side of that, when it doesn't, well, you got to suck it up and take the loss as well. So.
And what is the inspiration for your material? What kind of jokes are you doing?
It's really observational, and I know that's somewhat of just a general term, but I don't focus really on one, a specific type of joke or a specific topic. I have everything that ranges from material about being single and online dating, which is a very common topic. I do some current events and political jokes because I'm a big news junkie. I do some jokes about traveling. I do some jokes about pets. I do some jokes about my dad. I mean, I really, wherever I can find something that's interesting and something that I think is funny, I run with it. And like I said, some of it works and some of it doesn't. Some of it somewhat works, and then you keep working on it until it works really well.
I've talked to a couple of comedians out of Atlanta, and both of them said it's a pretty hot comedy scene there. Very
much so. That was one of the things that made the decision to move here very easy. Really, I was looking more at the like I said, the entertainment, the TV film side of it, which is really booming here. But the benefit of that was I was going to what I think is a stronger comedy scene than South Florida, and that's not to take anything away from South Florida because they do have a very strong comedy scene. But here, like I said, because it's more of a city and because it's more densely populated in a smaller area, there's a lot more venues. There's a lot more places to get up. I mean, if you wanted to get up 4 times a night during the week, you could, which is amazing. And the strength of the talent that is here is just phenomenal. The first week I was here that I moved, I decided to just go see a show. I wasn't even performing in it, just one of the open mics here. And I was sitting at the bar just watching these comedians, and nobody knew who I was, and I didn't know who any of these people were. But I was sitting at that bar watching the show going, man, I got to write better jokes. If I'm gonna survive here, I mean, if this is just a Monday night open mic, which had almost 200 people through the door, which to me alone was amazing. The strength of the talent that was here in Atlanta really made me kind of crack the book and get sharpen up my tools.
What do you want out of comedy? What are your goals?
It's always an interesting question. I like to perform. I like to do stand-up. I like to act. I like to do podcasts and voice work. I love every aspect of all of it. So I think my goal in life is to make my living through performance. And if that comes as being a stand-up comedian, I would love that. If it comes from being an actor, I would love that. So I don't have sort of one specific, this is my goal is to become a road comic, and that's all I want to be. I just would love to be able to make a good living and support myself through performing. So it could be a mix of everything. It could be one singular thing. I don't really have a specific, area that I'm focusing on so much that's my only path.
The road comic path, that seems like a shitty life.
Yeah, I mean, it does. It really, I've heard both sides of it, and I think it depends. Number one, on your level of success, and I think it depends on really what you want out of, the experience. I know some road comics who absolutely hate it, and I can't wait to get off the road. But I know some people who that love it, and they do it 6 months out of the year, and that's their year, and they do other things the rest of the 6 months. So I think it depends on the person, depends on what you want to do, depends on where you're performing, and if obviously if you're sort of on the C level or D level of venues, I'm sure it can be very frustrating, very trying. But if you're at the B or even A level of venues, I'm sure it can be very fulfilling.
Do you hear from these guys what kind of money they might make if they have a door deal or in a weekend? Do you hear any of that type of stuff?
Nothing specific, but I mean, I know that people do make a living at it. I mean, they're not living out of their cars. So, again, I think it just depends on your level of success. And I also think that the more you do it, obviously depending on your level of talent, but if you're good enough to at least make a living, at the D level doing it, you're sort of on your way to moving yourself up, I would think.
Do you have, because you have some background in broadcasting, television, sports you mentioned, and other work, the on-camera stuff, and I don't mean to diss comedy at all, but at some point you could say, well, okay, and again, maybe this goes to my low self-esteem. If I do well in a comedy club, I think, well, okay, I just made a room full of drunk people in a comedy club in a strip mall laugh. Do you know what I mean? But then if I do a newscast for a major radio station, that's maybe more fulfilling on some level for maybe I'm just trying to build my own self-esteem through accomplishment. But at some point, does it differ for you? The rewards, are they different? Do you measure them differently?
I do, actually. Well, I shouldn't say that. I don't think I measure them differently from like a level of achievement, but I'm much more comfortable doing stand-up comedy. So from that aspect, it's I don't consider it as challenging as the acting because I'm not as good at the acting. So the acting, that to me, I really have to kind of focus on. I really have to hone, and I really have to practice. And that's not to say I don't do those same things with comedy, but not as comedy to me comes a little bit more natural than the acting work does. So when I do book a role or I do shoot something, that actually I'm a lot more nervous there than I've ever been going up on stage to do comedy. And I'm sure, or at least I hope, that the more I do the acting, I'll get that same level of comfort. But to me, I think the other part of it is, when you're on stage as a stand-up, it's your stuff. The audience has no idea what's going to come out of your mouth next. So you're very much in control of that situation. I can switch jokes around if I want, on the fly, or I can make stuff up as I go along. When you're doing something like, playing a role of on a TV show or a commercial or something, there are people there that wrote what you're going to say. There's people there that, know the story of how they want it to go, and are looking for specific emotions. So it's more like you're trying to give them, what they're looking for. So there's it's just it makes it a little bit more difficult, at least in my mind, it makes it a little bit more difficult because, it's something that you're trying to provide to them as opposed to they're sitting there waiting for what you're going to provide provide to them.
On this, I have just a really a little bit of insight into what you're talking about, and much respect to actors. You think of actors as, well, they're overpaid or they're lazy or they're hams and they're seeking attention. But for someone, and you brought up, I think, a really good point. When you go to a shoot, they may say, okay, you are the concerned father for like a hospital commercial. Now act sad. And it might be noon on a Monday to come out with an emotion on demand. For me, is almost impossible. And I tell a story a few years ago. I do some voice work, and I have an agent that does some print and video work. Like you said, the folks there in Atlanta, that's kind of a hub. Well, outside of LA, they come and shoot some stuff here because it's cheaper in Arizona. You get the talent cheaper. Everything's cheaper. And my agent said, oh, we have America's Most Wanted coming over here, and they're casting. And we have a role that we think you should go for. It's for a rapist who is on the run. And if you remember America's Most Wanted, they would say, oh, and then Bill Smith talked to the police, and he hasn't been seen since he disappeared, right? So all I had to do was sit at a table, and I thought, okay, there's no way I'm going to do this because I don't want my resume to say, this is actually during the Great Recession. I don't want my resume to say that I played a rapist on America's Most Wanted or whatever, right? And then I'm thinking, okay, but this is $1,500 a day. It's a half-day shoot, and we're all starving to death. And I showed up, and I'm like 6 feet tall, brown and just all the stats, whatever. And I thought, okay, I'm going to be like the only guy here. And man, I show up. There must have been 40 guys, all of them better looking than me. And you walk in, and it's what you said. I mean, and there was no dialogue. All I had to do was sit at a table, because basically they're saying, the casting guy is saying, okay, you're sitting at the table. Joey here is going to play the sheriff detective, and they're kind of interviewing you about the circumstances of this crime. You may be a person of interest, a suspect. All you have to do is basically sit there and look concerned, or, like that. And I sat there, and I never heard boo from that. I mean, that was maybe the biggest kick to my professional ego ever, was to get not even a call back or a second read for a rapist on America's Most Wanted, like some recreation thing. And the guys, a lot of those actors, I'm coming in as a voice person, maybe more like yourself, and as a broadcaster, and these actors, I mean, these guys, they have incredible resumes. They've done, live theater and plays and, student films and independent films, and they're like emoting on the spot out in the waiting room. And I'm looking at this thinking, it just blew my mind how difficult this was, and how seriously they take this, actors do. And that's when I hear James Lipton on Inside the Actor Studio or someone like that call it a craft, I have such a different view of it and a whole lot more respect for it.
Yeah, it's incredible to me. And there's this, balance of, okay, you want to show what emotions you're supposed to be portraying, but you don't want to show the emotions that you're portraying. You know what I mean? You don't want to overact it. You don't want to, that type of stuff. So it's a very subtle, very nuanced, very, just very small type things that you do just to be able to have that look of concern when someone's talking to you. I mean, and you think to yourself, what does that look of concern even look like? If somebody said, hey, look concerned, I mean, what do? You furrow your brow a little bit, you squeeze your eyes together, how do you make that come across without looking like, you're just being a goofball, or just really trying to overdo it? And you're right. I mean, that story was a perfect example of why, I find, the acting part of it so much more challenging. Where it's still fun. I mean, it's great, and I love it, and there's a big reward to it because I find it so challenging. But the stand-up, to me, like I said, because it's my own stuff and because I'm kind of running the show when I'm on that stage with that mic, it's not as nerve-wracking to me.
And your material, do you have a routine, an act worked up at this point? Or are you constantly trying out new stuff? What is your shtick at this point?
I do some feature work at some comedy clubs. So, I mean, I've got a 25-minute set that I've got, in my back pocket ready to go. but I'm always constantly trying out new material. I'm always writing new stuff, and trying to get out, at least twice a week to some open mics and stuff, just to run some new material. Because I think the jokes in my 25-minute set are great. They could be better. And I could write a new joke that's funnier and drop the weakest joke out of that set and plug in a new joke, or take things in new directions. So it's always a constant, it's always constantly being worked on. I mean, the old adage is a joke is never finished, and I believe in that. And I believe there's jokes that I wrote 3 years ago that, I'll just wake up one morning and be like, oh, it would be a lot funnier if I said it this way, and it'll change the whole joke and make it so much stronger. So, yeah, no, I'm constantly writing new stuff and constantly trying new stuff because you never know. I mean, you write 10 jokes and you hope 2 of them work.
What is your best joke? Do you have a go-to that has never failed, always kills?
Go-to that? Yeah, I have a few in there that I know will always get a laugh. I'm a big believer in, I approach stand-up comedy, like the way I've always put it is when you get on stage, the audience doesn't know who you are. At this level, they have no idea who Jon Levine is. I'm not Chris Rock. So you're Chris Rock. They have an expectation of how they know you're going to be funny, or at least they're expecting that you're going to be funny because that's your reputation. They don't know who Jon Levine is. So when I'm walking on that stage, it's like I'm walking into a conversation. If there's a group of people standing around talking, and I just walk up, everyone's going to look at me like, okay, who is this person, and why should we listen to him? So I'm a big believer in once you get on stage, you hit them with a quick joke that is going to work, a quick funny joke, and that way at that point you buy yourself some legitimacy. So they're laughing right off the bat. They go, oh, you know what? This guy seems like he's funny. Let's give him a little bit more attention.
What's something? Can you share something that you'll open with an actual joke?
Yeah. So one of the jokes that I open with usually is. I'll say, it's great to be here in, wherever I'm at, in Atlanta. I travel quite a bit for comedy. Most recently, I was in West Virginia, and I don't know if you guys know this, but West Virginia is the only state where they use Ancestry.com as a dating website. and that's a good little icebreaker.
That is, and that's, yeah, I get you, because right up front, you got them right up front. You opened with a joke, so you're buying yourself some time. You could,
Correct.
Then
and it's and then you get into the longer stuff, and it's quick and it's funny. You got to keep it moving. I mean, people's attention spans are, so short. So as long as you can buy yourself a little bit of time off the top, and then you can get into some, and sometimes, I'll get into, I'll throw a couple shorter jokes behind that just to really get them going, and then I can get into some longer bits, longer material. You got to feel out your audience.
Earlier in the interview, I was obviously I was kidding around, but my mother did sort of abandon me, and that does have an effect. And I see that the majority of comics are some version of me. People in broadcasting had, they have a need for recognition, for approval, for love. I would say I'm the 3 out of 4. You're the 1 out of 4 in that your parents were not only, good with you and loving with you, but they encouraged your exploration of the arts. And my question is, do you see that manifest itself with other comics who maybe are, just all depressed off stage and they get on stage and they're happy for a little while? Can you see the difference? Have you picked up on that between yourself and them?
I have. I think usually, and honestly, I think that is somewhat of a, I don't want to say a detriment to me, or it puts me at a disadvantage, but there's certainly a difference. A lot, comedy is dark or can be very dark. And I don't have a lot of those dark places to go because of basically what you just mentioned is, I'm a generally happy person and had a really good upbringing. And it's tough for me to go into those really sort of deep, dark places that I know other comedians go to and sometimes live in, which really brings out a lot of the creativity. But I can certainly see that. And in fact, I like I said, I'm single and I do some online dating. And just the other day I was talking with a girl and she's like, oh, I see that you're a stand-up comedian. She's like, that could be, I've hung out with some stand-up comedians and I don't know, they're usually a little, little kind of weird or strange, whatever she said. And I wrote her, I said, look, I hang out with stand-up comedians too. I know what you're talking about. I'm not that stand-up comedian. You know what I mean? I'm not that sort of self-loathing, depressed comedian that, gets on stage and that pain, comes out and manifests itself in humor. But there's certainly something to be said for that level, or what that allows you to achieve, or what that allows you to do that I can't necessarily do because I don't have those, I can't go to those same places.
You fit into the spectrum. I think you're on one side, and like Richard Pryor, whose mother was a hooker, would be on the other side. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're so extremely damaged, and then there are folks like yourself, guys like yourself, who were raised in functional families, and you're doing it maybe for a different motivation. Like you said, you just can't go to that place where I was abandoned, I don't know love. But I think maybe those comics, there's more people in the audience who are like those comics than there are like you. And God bless you that you had a great childhood. But do you know what I'm saying? Maybe people relate to that more because more people than didn't had fucked up childhoods.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. But sort of, everybody plays the hand that they're dealt. You know what I mean? This is, I'm coming at it from my perspective, and that's really the only perspective I can come at it from. So I just got to work with what I got.
Your biggest comedic influences?
Ooh, I would probably say George Carlin, Jerry Seinfeld, Eddie Murphy. Really the comedians that I grew up with, Brian Regan, the comedians I grew up watching and are still big fans of. Sharp, really good joke writers. Relevant, all of those things to me are sort of what I look at and try to put into my work and try to think of when I'm writing jokes, is to make it creative and to really put a fine point on it the way I think they did or do.
Back to online dating, has or is comedy helping you with women? Because women really seem to react well to, I think it's the humor that comics bring, and maybe a little bit of local, regional, some cases national stardom.
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt about that. I mean, I don't know if your listeners have seen a picture of me or not, but if it wasn't for being funny, I wouldn't get laid. So, it's certainly, women will say, oh, I'm looking for a guy that can make me laugh. So having, the fact that you're a stand-up comedian sort of in your online dating profile certainly gives you a little bit of a leg up because, a lot of women, look for something like that. But, yeah, there's no doubt. And I also think maybe subconsciously or even, semi-consciously, there's something, it says something about a person who can get up on that stage, grab a microphone in front of a group of people and talk to them, because it's not an easy thing to do. And I'm not saying that I'm, so much better than anybody else that can't do it, but, it's just I have mad respect for people who can do it because I know how hard it is. And I think a lot of other people see that as well. So I think that certainly, just adds a little bit of excitement. It adds a little bit of intrigue. It says something about somebody's personality who not only can do it, but enjoys doing it.
And they get up there, and there's that old saying that the number 2 fear in America is death. The number 1 fear is public speaking, and stand-up may be the big dog of all public speaking activities because there's a high probability that you're going to try and be funny and probably bomb, all of us.
Yeah. There's more than a high probability.
It's almost a likelihood unless you have a really good night or a good crowd or people drink a little more, right? And I don't know, whenever I've done it, I reached a point in life, and I'm a couple of years older than you, but every time I would do it, I would just be so fulfilled for that because on that level, because I felt like I faced my biggest fear and everything after that in terms of, public speaking or, approaching a girl, a woman was easier.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there's no doubt about that. It's not that I was ever sort of a shy person. I've always been, an extrovert. But since I started doing stand-up, just generally in life, just talking to people, in the grocery store. I mean, I don't even think twice about it. About saying something or commenting on something or saying hi to somebody. I have zero trepidation because 3-4 nights a week, I'm on stage talking to strangers, and trying to elicit laughs from them. So it really makes everything else in life kind of look easy.
Thank you so much, Jon Levine, JonLevine.com, JonLevine.com. Check him out, performing throughout Atlanta and the greater region. That is Jon. Very good dude, joining us on episode 19 of Troy Wilde Interviews, the broadcast quality podcast available on Apple Podcasts, formerly iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, our website. I also put up one of these things on Facebook. I create a slideshow. This thing takes like 2 hours to do, to process. Holy shit, it takes forever. But thank you very much for listening. It's very much appreciated. The best thing that you can do for me, if you are so inclined, is to share this podcast. And only if you think it's worth sharing, not because you think, oh, I want to help this poor fuck. No. If you think it's worth sharing, do so on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, your social media. Give it to your mom, your dad, your brother, your kids, your wife, your ex-girlfriend, your husbands, your sisters, your cousins, the guys at work, the neighbors, people you run into at Walmart. Just say, hey, man, you got to listen to Troy Wilde Interviews at TroyWilde.com. And if you don't, I'll kick the living shit out of you. Not me. That's what you say to these people when you're out promoting my show for me. You know what? If you actually, now that I think about it, if you could do that, just say Troy Wilde. Take a look at Troy Wilde. Take a listen to Troy Wilde Interviews. And that would be very much appreciated. I promise that I will never date any of your relatives if you do that. Outstanding. Thank you for listening. Have an awesome day, an awesome week, an awesome month, an awesome year, an awesome millennium, and an awesome life.